Tonight we've got Charley Morley, who is a familiar here. He's already given a few talks, and he's an excellent speaker. He's also written numerous books as a published Hay House author, and has, I think, toured over 20 countries, something like this. And tonight he's going to explore the shadow in Vajrayana Buddhism, which is a very interesting topic as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, it's interesting as well because he's using obviously the Jungian term shadow and then the term Vajrayana. So we immediately begin to see a kind of exploration, if you like, between Buddhist ideas and Western psychological ideas. So for myself at least, I'm really interested to see what Charley's got to say this evening. And I would just like to add, there will be questions and an opportunity to ask questions at the end of his talk. And I'd just like to remind you all that the Festival of Mind is going to go on all of this weekend with talks and workshops, and actually also the following weekend as well. And the following week is what's called Mind Awareness Week. So it ties in well with that as well. So I'd just like to welcome Charley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk for an hour, and then there'll be time for questions afterwards. Before we begin, I'd like to, just myself actually, you could join me, just in settling and grounding, just before we begin. Just taking a moment to make yourself totally comfortable. If you could be 10% more comfortable, make that 10% adjustment. So for me, I'm going to loosen my belt. Make myself 10% more comfortable. And then you're sitting, eyes open or closed, either's fine. Breathing through the nose or the mouth, either is fine. Just resting naturally. Just noticing the ground beneath us, the support of the ground, the support of the chair. We are supported. Noticing our body. Just taking a moment to tune in to the sensations of your physical form right now. How's it feeling? What can you notice? From ground to body to breath. Just noticing the process of breathing. From ground to body to breath to mind. Just taking a moment in the same way as you tuned into your body. How's your mind right now? As Trungpa Rinpoche once said, listen to the music of the mind. So my question is, what music is playing right now in your mind? What genre? Maybe it's heavy metal, maybe it's classical, either are fine, I love them both. Just noticing. What's the music of my mind right now? Ground, breath, body, mind, and awareness. And into awareness. Setting our intention and motivation to explore the concept of the shadow within Western psychology and perhaps its appearance within Tibetan Buddhism, with an open heart and an open mind, with a motivation that we might be more awake, more aware, and more kind for the benefit of all beings. Okay. So this wonderful quote from Macha Glidran, "Go to the places that scare you in order to find the Buddha within." Ian Baker brought my attention to that quote. Ian been here recently, right, for his book launch? Yeah, so Ian Baker's, I think he's brilliant. I think he's a brilliant man. I think he's a brilliant scholar. I think he's doing some really revolutionary stuff. Go towards the places that scare you in order to find the Buddha within. Definitely sounds like some of the instructions found within the Western tradition of shadow integration. And yet, before we even begin, it's vital to know that the concept of the shadow does not appear within Tibetan Buddhism. The shadow is based on the self. So how can a tradition that moves beyond the confines of the limited self be limited by the concept of shadow? So in one way, this talk could be very short. No, you don't find shadow integration in Tibetan Buddhism. And yet, if we get beyond the term shadow and shadow integration, I would like to present you with an argument that there are dozens of practices within mainstream Tibetan Buddhism that tick all the boxes of what the Western psychologists might refer to as shadow integration. So let's start from the beginning. What is the shadow? This term pioneered in the West by the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, not invented, of course, but kind of pioneered. He used it to well, you tell me, what is the shadow? Let's do an interactive bit. Anyone got a nice definition of the shadow? And you definitely won't be shamed if it's not correct, because that would be ironically shadow projective of me.
Suppressed or rejected part of ourselves that we keep not visible to ourself, that is rational, aware, something what we really don't want to see and we are not aware of.
Nailed it. Something we don't want to see, that we're not aware of, suppress, repress aspects of ourselves that we push away out of conscious awareness. Yeah, what else?
Which can be, there's a book, for example, called Your Golden Shadow.
Ah, yes.
I think it's Robert, I forget which author it was, but that one can also push away parts of yourself that are positive. It's not only negative things.
Absolutely. So when we think about, let's look at, these are brilliant. Anything else before we look at the Jung's definition? You basically nailed it between you two. Jung described the shadow as the parts of the unconscious mind that we have repressed, denied, or disowned. He referred to it as the dark side of the human psyche, but crucially not dark meaning bad or evil or malign, dark meaning yet to be illuminated. So when we think of the parts of ourselves that we suppress, deny, disown, that we hide from ourselves and others, we might think, okay, our shame, our perversions, our prejudice, our anger, our irritability. But there are also other aspects that we hide from ourselves and others, which are overtly beneficial. And this is sometimes referred to as the positive shadow or the golden shadow. Does anybody here, actually I don't know how this will go down here, but does anybody here hide their esoteric side from their friends or family for fear of being labelled too woo-woo? Oh, I thought maybe I'd be the only one to put their hands up. Okay, so we know this is overtly beneficial, our spiritual side, our esoteric side, and yet we hide it. Golden shadow. It's still something we hide, something we suppress, something we repress, and yet is overtly beneficial. This could be our hidden talents, our hidden creativity. In Wales last year, a Welsh rugby player guy, gave a brilliant example of golden shadow. He loves to sing. You know, karaoke is very big in Cardiff, in Wales, actually. He loves to sing karaoke, but he's so embarrassed that his rugby mates will find out he's a great singer. He said, I drive 2 towns away, which was a big deal. That was like miles away from him. I drive 2 towns away to sing karaoke in case the guys at rugby find me. Is that my golden shadow? I was like, yes. This talent, this love, this creative outlet of his singing voice that he was hiding from others for fear of being shamed, for fear of rejection of the tribe. You know, rejection from the tribe used to be paramount to death. This is why public speaking is ranked so high on people's worst fears. It's not that public speaking is scary. It is the rejection of the tribe that may lead from a bad talk in public that is so scary. Because rejection from the tribe used to mean death. So, we have what we might refer to as the dark shadow and the golden shadow, although again, this is a duality we can move beyond pretty quickly when you start doing the practice. Rob Nairn, one of my teachers, he refers to the shadow as simply anything that you hide from yourself and others. Our friend Will was asking actually how I got into the kind of Jungian side of things just now, and I said, I'm a product of my teachers. One is Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, who's the abbot of Sanling Monastery in Scotland, who's obviously a full-on Tibetan Lama of the Tantric tradition, and the other is a man called Rob Nairn. Rob Nairn is, and was, a criminologist, professor of criminology at Cape Town University, with a big field in the study of Jung, of Carl Jung. And he wrote a book called Living, Dreaming, Dying, which is a Jungian psychological interpretation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which if, like me, you've tried reading parts of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and it's, boom, it's way over your head, this is a really great way to open it up to a kind of a psychological framework. And he taught me about the shadow. In fact, the first time I encountered the shadow was through my lucid dreams, when I first got asked to teach about 10 years ago, and I tried to suppress anything that was sexual or violent in my lucid dreams. And the more I tried to suppress it, the worse it got, until these full-on sexualized demons were appearing in my lucid dreams. And I was just so ashamed and embarrassed of them. I'd try and chop their heads off and stuff. I could do this really cool thing where I could make myself into Wolverine and go, shoo, and the knife things would come out. I'd chop their heads off and stuff. And I told Rob about this, and he said, oh, I believe what you're encountering in your lucid dreams are not demons. This is your shadow. You must embrace the shadow. So this is the instruction I got, embracing the shadow. And then a couple of weeks later, whenever it was, I had a similar lucid dream, full-on big sexualized demon, two male heads, one female head, and I'm about to kind of fight it in the lucid dream. And then I remember what Rob said. I thought, right, embrace the shadow. So I literally moved towards the thing in the lucid dream and hug it. And I thought it would just turn into white light or something. It didn't. It was like biting my neck and saying these terrible things. Of course, it was the personification of my repressed capacity for violence, sexuality, perversions, irritability, anger, all the shadow stuff. But as I held on to it, it eventually changed. It transformed, and I was hugging myself. And it was this really weird moment of stepping back, and there was me, but with this kind of silver sheen. It was me, but like a silver version of me. Anyway, when I eventually saw Rob Nairn, I told him the story, and I said, was that embracing the shadow? And he went, oh, absolutely, but you're crazy, man. I didn't mean literally hug the thing. And I said, you said embrace the shadow. Oh, embracing the shadow is a Jungian term used to describe the integration of the shadow through various means, blah, 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 blah. But then he said, actually, no, you should do that. You should hug it. Because it's that's the rare thing about lucid dreaming. Psychological concepts become personified. You can literally meet your fear. You can meet direct aspects of fear. I had a kickboxing competition just a week or so ago, and before the competition I had quite a lot of fear, and I became lucid and I met the fear of the kickboxing competition. He was a big Japanese heavy-set kind of warrior guy, not what my opponent looked like, but when I asked him, he said, I am the fear of the fight. And then we trained together in martial arts in the lucid dream. So you can actually meet these direct fears in lucid dreaming. And that is one of the shadow integration things we'll look at. So we know what the shadow is. This term shadow integration, like Rob Nairn says, any practice that brings us into direct assimilation of unintegrated dark or golden shadow aspects could be referred as shadow integration exercises. The reason why I'm not here tomorrow is because I'm running a shadow integration workshop. Don't come here, but if anyone else wants to come, you can come. It's on my website. Let me give an example of some of the exercises we'll do there. There are things like exploring questions such as, what am I most afraid of? What am I most ashamed of? What lies about myself do I tell other people? Uncomfortable questions. And then golden shadow questions like, where in my life do I hide my light? If I didn't have to work for money, how would I spend my time? Questions like that. And then we do exercise with masks. There's a exercise where tomorrow everyone will get a blank mask, kind of papier-mâché style mask. And on the outside of the mask, they will write or draw their persona, the mask they share with the world. It could be very true, could be complete falsehood, but how you present yourself to the world. So on my mask I write things like lucid dreaming teacher, author, good Buddhist, friendly, smiley, martial artist, meditator. Oh, come on. Are they false? No. But are they true all of the time? No. It's my persona. It's how I want you guys to think I am all the time, but I'm clearly not. That's our persona, our mask to the world. Then we flip the mask. And on the inside of the mask, I get people to write everything they hide from others. And mine says things like fighter, part-time practitioner, scared boy. One really different one was porn watcher. You know, that was I was really ashamed of that. This is the first time I did the mask. This is a few years ago. This is almost 3 years ago now. So this is the first time I did the mask, and I put porn watcher and all this kind of stuff. And actually, the first time I did that exercise, it was such a release when I was doing it. I thought, wow, this is really powerful. I should use this at workshops. And I was at the Buddhist Center at the time when I first kind of designed that exercise. And I'd finished, and I'd written the mask, written all my kind of worst dirty secrets on the inside of the mask. Then I put it down on my bed, and it was shadow side up. And I thought for a minute, oh, what if my wife walks in? My fiance then into the room. So I put it persona side up. And then I thought, what a hypocrite. You're considering teaching this, writing a book about it, you know, that was before the book came out, and you can't even show it to your wife? Hypocrite. So I flipped it up, shadow side. When's she going to come in? And then I had this little voice in my head. I still don't know whether it was the demon or the angel, you know, in the cartoons. But the voice said, you should put it on Facebook. And I was like, good idea. And you can see it still on my Facebook page now. And I took a photo of that, the outside of the persona and the shadow side, the porn watcher, what else? You know, part-time practitioner, doesn't lucid dream all the time, you know, fighter, all this kind of stuff. I hope people wouldn't find out. And there was about 2 seconds of feeling good when I uploaded it onto I uploaded it to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, over 10,000 followers simultaneously. And there was about 2 seconds where I felt good. And then just boom, it was like a sucker punch. And I really felt this is a bad thing to do. The 3 main things were I'll be asked to leave the Buddhist Center because Lama Zangma will see it and she'll think, well, where's he watching porn? So I thought I'm going to get chucked out of the Buddhist Center. Second one was I'm going to get dropped by my publisher, Hay House, because they're quite kind of love and light. And I've just put this thing up about the shadow. I'm going to be dropped. And thirdly, my fiance at the time won't marry me because now she knows who I really am. That was a bad one. So I actually tried to take it down. And I'm there on my iPhone, like struggling to take it down on 3 things, trying to delete, which is quite difficult because I'd put it up with Hootsuite, which is this kind of app thing. Anyways, I'm struggling. And then the phone starts vibrating. And I'm assuming it's people telling me you're sacked, you're a freak, you're a pervert, this is terrible, how do we trust you? But it's not. It's really positive comments, and they just keep coming. And then people are sharing it, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll just watch how this pans out before I delete it. Within a couple of hours, it was my most liked, most shared, most positively commented on social media post of all time. I don't have a really big following on social media, it didn't go viral or anything, but in my little world, it was well received. And then now that's in the book, and that's in the workshop we'll do tomorrow and stuff like that. Anyway, that is an example of these shadow integration exercises, intentionally going towards the places that scare you. Perhaps in order to find the Buddha within as a way to release ourselves from our shame, to move from fear to love, from shame to acceptance, to be okay with who we are, to stop beating ourselves up. So that kind of approach to shadow integration, do we find anything akin to that within Tibetan Buddhism? I would argue yes and no. Not directly, but I think there are some practices which absolutely tick those boxes of integration of the shadow, both golden and dark. Before we begin, I want to tell you 2 stories, one about a peacock, one about an ogress. You've probably heard them before, but I love to tell them because I'm a storyteller. And people have to sit through my stories. The first one, let's do Peacock and the Poison, which I think is a really good description of the approach of Tantra within the Buddhist path. It said there is a poisonous plant on the path. If you want to go down that path, you have 3 options. Oh, I need to tell you something first of all. Footnote, peacocks. In the Eastern tradition, I think in Hinduism too, but definitely in Buddhism, peacocks are seen as symbols of our potential for awakening. Because it's said that peacocks can eat poisonous plants. Now there is some truth to that. Peacocks got a very strong stomach. They can eat pretty thorny stuff, pretty poisonous stuff, and they don't get sick. But in the Buddhist tradition, it said that the reason the peacocks have such beautiful plumage is because they eat poisonous plants. Through the alchemical transmutation of the peacock, they can transform these poisons into the plumage of awakening. So you go down the path, there are said to be three choices. Number one, you see a poisonous plant on the path, you go, oh, poison, don't go near it. It's safe, but it means you can't take the path you want to in life, and it means that plant is still there, spreading its seeds, spreading its roots, getting more poisonous. Option number two, you see a poisonous plant on the path, and you know the antidotes to the poison. So you go, okay, well, I can walk this path, I'm not going to touch it, but if I do, I've got the antidote, so I'm okay. That would be the second approach. And then there's the approach of Panchayana, which is said to be like the peacock. When you walk down a path and you see the poisonous plant, you go, dinner time. And you intentionally move towards these places that most people avoid as a way to alchemically transmutate the potential poison of these emotions into the plumage of the peacock, or into the peacock's plumage of awakening. I think that story is absolutely about shadow integration, about moving, rather than avoiding these mind poisons, finding ways to alchemically transmutate them intentionally on the path of awakening. And the other story, which some of you may not know, as it doesn't seem to be quite as popular, the Ogress of the Rock. This one's great. It said there's a yogi living in a cave up a cliff by himself. And he's there meditating all day. Every day and all through the night he's meditating, and as the nights draw in, he starts to have this experience when it gets dark of an ogress, a female ogre, climbing up the side of the cliff. Dong, dong, dong. And each night she's getting higher and higher and higher. And this starts to freak the yogi out, so he actually breaks his retreat to go and visit his guru. So he leaves the cave, goes down the cliff into the village, he finds his guru and says, you know, my guru, this is happening every night. The ogress is getting closer and closer, and tonight I'm pretty sure she's going to make it over the top of the cliff into my cave, and she's going to eat me. But don't worry, my guru. I've got my knife. Apparently all Tibetans carried knives back then. Who knows? But anyway, he's got his knife. He says, don't worry, my guru, I've got my knife. And I'm going to stab the ogress if she makes it over the cliff today. And the guru says, okay, you could do that, but let me give you another option. Let me give you a piece of chalk. And the guru gives him a chunk of chalk, white chalk, and he says, if that ogress makes it over the cliff and into your cave tonight, I want you to draw a cross on her body. And he thinks, but you know, this is crazy, she'll eat me. But he says, it's my guru, okay, I'll do the cross. Secretly thinking he's going to stab her afterwards, but he'll take the chalk. And that night he goes up the cliff into his cave and he starts his meditation practices. The night draws in and yes, he hears again, chung, 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 the ogress getting closer and closer. And yes, this time she does come over the cliff. And yes, this time she does come into the cave. And he reaches for his knife. And then he remembers the words of the guru, drops the knife, picks up the chalk. And he goes to this ogress and chung, chung, draws a white cross on her stomach. And then boom, blacks out. Wakes up in the morning as the sunlight streams into the cave. Ogress is gone. Nothing in the cave. He looks down and there's a white cross on his stomach. Again, although these terms aren't used, shadow integration isn't integral to the tantric path. To see all as mind, these outward projections of fear, of demons, as internal representations of our own fears, our own shadows. Let's look at some of these in turn. So projection. Of course, so much of the Buddhist path is about learning about our projections, and so much of shadow integration is about learning of our projections. There are whole exercises where you know, the classic one of noticing which people irritate you as ways to gain insight into your own shadow. So the most common form of projection being when you meet somebody who irritates you to an inflated degree, there is a possibility that they may be reflecting an unseen shadow aspect within yourself. So let's say you have an arrogant part of yourself that you are unwilling to see or unwilling to admit that you have, and you start seeing arrogance in everybody else to an inflated degree. Then perhaps there could be an element of projected shadow there. It also works the other way though, and a lot of people don't know this one so much, golden shadow projection. Have you ever met someone where rather than they really irritate you, oh God, that guy really pissed me off, everything he said was so annoying. You meet someone and you're like, oh my God, they're so cool. Everything they say really opens me up, I really love them. That's golden shadow projection. When was the last time you met someone when you felt like that? Like, oh wow, this person, I just want to be their friend, everything they said, it's still projection. It's still unseen aspects of ourselves which have been triggered to an inflated degree and projected onto the other, but it's with our golden shadow. For example, when two people go to a party and they both meet a guy called Dave, and one of them leaves the party, oh wow, did you meet Dave? He's so great, I can't wait to make friends with him on Facebook. Dave is amazing. And the other person says, who? They don't even remember him. One of them saw their own unseen golden shadow being triggered to an inflated degree by Dave's behavior. He was representing some unseen golden aspect of themselves. The other person was not triggered, so they did not have that same projection. So classic kind of Jungian ideas of finding projection in everyday life. And of course we have that in Buddhist practice. Everything from the earliest stages of mindfulness meditation in Shinei to, I assume, the highest forms of Dzogchen and Mahamudra are about looking at how the mind creates projection. How the mind is literally creating reality through its power of projection. So the study of projection within Jungian psychology, I think, can be, not directly, but can be helpful towards a Tibetan Buddhist view of projection. Of course, again, the Tibetan Buddhist view is so much wider. It's that this is literally projection. This is a co-created reality. There's a story about Atisha, which is very much linked to the Jungian view of projection. Atisha apparently used to have as his assistant the most annoying man in Tibet. This guy who would be farting in the middle of teachings, he was always stepping over text, never turning up on time. And people say, Atisha, you're a great master. Why do you have this really annoying guy as your assistant? And Atisha famously said, he is my greatest teacher. Every day he shows me my weak spots. So this intentional movement towards places that show us our projection is absolutely part of the path. And God, just hanging out in Buddhist centers, right? I lived in a Buddhist center for almost 8 years. Yeah, we all know about projection. You hang out with unenlightened people trying to be enlightened, myself especially, and it's so much projection, right? So much projection. And if we can become aware of that, we become more kind, more helpful, less likely to project onto others. Golden shadow projection, I think we absolutely find within Vajrayana Buddhism. The example I'm going to use is that of the guru. So we discussed golden shadow projection, where rather than somebody irritating you because they are triggering some unseen aspect of your shadow, you actually feel a sense of admiration and awe because somebody you meet is triggering an aspect of your golden shadow. I'm almost certain that in the guru-student relationship, this is playing out to a large degree. And in the case of my relationship with Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, I am certain that he is aware of it. I became aware of it when, this is about a couple of years ago, often when I have interviews with him, I used to try and prostrate, and he would also, get up, don't do that. He's not into that kind of stuff. Until one time, a couple of years ago, I was going to prostrate, and I said, it's for me. It's for me. I said, I'm not doing this for you. I'm not doing this in deference. I'm doing it because you are a representation of my Buddha nature. And I want to bow to you because I'm bowing to my Buddha nature. And I went, it's for me. And he went, for you? And I went, yeah. And he went, ah. And now he lets me prostrate 3 times every time I have an interview, every time since then. I'm sure in that was a recognition that I was projecting the ultimate golden shadow, my own Buddha nature, onto him. And that he was like a mirror, simply reflecting it back to me. I'm just going to read something from here because I say it much better in the book. My theory is, that the wisdom of our inner teacher, who is the ultimate teacher, of course, is so awesome that we can often only see it through proxy, via projection onto an outer teacher. This outer teacher serves as a template for awakening, upon which the student projects their own Buddha nature. Through this process, the golden shadow potential of the student becomes not only much easier to recognize, but is in fact magnified by this. The real crux of the process, though, is found in what the teacher does next. I believe an authentic teacher will be aware that ultimately the enlightened qualities of the student that the student has projected onto them have to be returned. And so rather than soaking up this devotional projection, they reflect them back at them. The primary duty of the teacher is to bring the disciple into an awareness of their own enlightened nature by handing them back their projections, I think. And I also think that's probably where some of the worst abuses of the teacher-student relationship can happen. That if you are projecting your Buddha nature or your golden shadow onto someone who has not fully integrated theirs, they are not like a mirror, they are like a sponge, and they will soak up your projection, leading to the ego-aggrandizement of the teacher and the deflation in enlightened energy of the student who's projecting onto them, I think. So golden shadow projection, absolutely. And that whole idea of Buddha nature. You know, I hide my Buddha nature from myself. Because if I truly accepted that I was a fully enlightened Buddha who just hadn't woken up to that fact yet, how could I possibly go on living the life I've been living? That is way more threatening to my sense of egoic self than admitting to sometimes watching porn. Way more threatening. How could I go on living the life I've been living if I truly accepted I had Buddha nature? It's too awesome, it's too radical, it's too shocking for me to accept. So I absolutely hide and run from parts of my Buddha nature. Maybe when I'm older and wiser, I'll be ready to face it and make the revolutionary changes to my life that realization requires. But right now, it's way too scary. Tonglen. This is a real great example of something akin to a shadow integration practice in Tibetan Buddhism. Does everybody know about Tonglen? Who's heard the term Tonglen before? I assume a lot of people, yeah. So there's two Tibetan words put together, giving and receiving. Tonglen's a brilliant exercise because it's kind of the opposite of this New Age hippie meditation where you just breathe out the bad stuff and only breathe in the good stuff and surround yourself with golden light and, you know, don't talk negatively, don't express your anger, this kind of stuff. It's the opposite of that. Tonglen asks you in a very simple form, let's say you were visualizing somebody who needs healing, and you could imagine that as you breathe in, you take on their suffering, you relieve them of their pain, suffering, and illness in the form of sometimes dark smoke that enters in through the nose, touches the heart, and is instantly transformed by the power of your compassion into this healing white light energy which you then breathe out towards them. And when people often hear about Tonglen, they don't want to do it. You know, the ego says, no way, I've got enough problems. You ask me to take on the pain of another? No way. And then you give them the whole thing, yeah, but the point is you're protected by the power of your compassion. And in fact, in some place in Tibet, you know, Tonglen was used as almost, not an immunization, what's the term? Basically, if you had kind of broken your arm, right, you go to a Tibetan doctor and they'd give you all the herbs and stuff, but also they'd say, do Tonglen for people with broken arms. And you would say, no, doctor, I'm the one with the broken arm. I don't want to breathe in more broken arm energy. He said, yes, but it will cure your broken arm energy. To breathe in and transform the broken arm energy of all sentient beings. So it has kind of an, and also it said, when you do Tonglen, for example, like I do Tonglen my mum who's got Alzheimer's, it could perhaps even have an immunizing effect. That rather than me getting Alzheimer's more because I'm breathing and transforming and sending out healing energy, perhaps I'm even immunizing myself. But we're scared to do it because the ego goes, no way am I going to do that. But if we do that, it's said to be a very powerful way to release the stranglehold that the ego holds over us. Because at least for a few minutes it asks us to do something that we're all scared to do, which is to put others before ourselves. But within Tonglen, within the kind of framework of it, absolutely it ticks these boxes of shadow integration. It asks us to transform the pain and suffering of another into this healing light energy that heals both the giver of Tonglen and the receiver in equal measure. The fourth one, dream yoga. So dream yoga, Milam, is it Milam Tanjur or something? Anyone, any Tibetan scholars here? Milam, let's check. Naljor, that's it. Milam Naljor. So Milam meaning dream, so dream yoga. The term given to a series of practices found within Tibetan Buddhism and other traditions too, which have lucid dream training at their foundation, but also can include the outer body experience practices, or in the West, what we call kind of astral projection, as well as some of the conscious sleeping practices. Sometimes they're separated into separate yogas, sometimes under the same umbrella as dream yoga. But important to know that dream yoga isn't Tibetan Buddhist lucid dreaming. That's a really sloppy kind of translation of what it was, of what it is. It goes way beyond the Western notion of lucid dreaming, in the same way as Tantra goes way beyond the Western notion of shadow work. Within the dream yoga teachings of Guru Padmasambhava, he talks about 4 stages of dream yoga. So I want to look at those now in relation to shadow integration. Sorry, I haven't done my definitions. I'm assuming people know this. Let's do a definition of a lucid dream is a dream where you are aware that you're dreaming as the dream is happening. So it's not just a really vivid dream. It's not a dream where you see future events, although you could. It's specifically a dream where you're sound asleep, but in the dream you go, oh wow, this is all a dream. You're not half awake, half asleep. That would be a slightly different experience. If you want to know what someone looks like when they're having a lucid dream, they look like this. Really, it's like they're out for the count. They're in REM dreaming sleep. That's at the bottom of the cycle. They're not moving. They're in muscular paralysis. They're out for the count. So you're totally asleep, but you have psychological definition is the reactivation of self-reflective awareness within the seemingly unconscious dream state. So basically you're dreaming and you go, oh wow, I'm dreaming. The practice of lucid dreaming is intentionally learning the techniques that allow you to do that at will, and then using the lucid dream state for psycho-spiritual growth. So in the West, you can use it for shadow integration, actually. You can use it for nightmares. So I've been working with veterans for the last few years, a lot of whom have bad nightmares, and lucid dreaming can be a really great way to integrate some of those nightmares, because if you're having a recurring dream you're back in Afghanistan, if you can learn a technique that allows you to know, oh, wait, I'm dreaming. I'm not back in Afghanistan, I'm dreaming I'm back in Afghanistan. Just that. You don't need to go and hug the people, all that shadow integration stuff, just knowing that you are dreaming and about being in danger and not actually in danger has a massive deconditioning effect on the mind affected by PTSD. You know, nightmares are a good sign. If you have a minor like car crash or something like that, you want to be having a nightmare about it within a couple of weeks. Like it's good, it's like the wound is weeping, the wound is healing. I had my first experience of a street crime actually in London about 6 months ago now. Very stupid. I was walking on the street at midnight in Finsbury Park on WhatsApp, and he was very mindful, I'll give you that. He came past on a push bike. I did not see him or hear him coming. Yoink, took it out of my hand. Next thing I know, I'm chasing the guy, which is real fight or flight. I didn't choose to. I was like, oh, my body's running. Okay, we're doing this. Anyway, he went down a side alley and I would chase him, and then I thought, oh, and then another bike appeared. And I had a moment in my naivety of thinking, oh, it's someone come to help me. It wasn't, it was his mate. And they were pincering me into, not an alley, but, you know, kind of a street. And they okay, take it. Anyway, I was fine, a bit shaken, but fine. 2 days later, I had a nightmare about the event. And when I woke up and I wrote down the dream in my dream diary, and at the end of the dream, I literally put, thanks, subby. Thank you, subconscious mind. Why thank you? For giving me the nightmare within 48 hours, for letting me work through that trauma so quickly, so cleanly. Whereas if it had been slightly later, it might have been a slightly deeper trauma. Seems that kind of trauma is like a heavy weight, that the heavier the trauma, the deeper it sinks, and the longer it takes to come up again. Which is why for PTSD, on average for PTSD, setting in war zone PTSD is 7 years. Not 7 months, 7 years. You know, and the benefits that we give armed forces veterans run out in this country? 7 years. There's a horrible irony to that, that just when a lot of these men and women need The help of their benefits is just when their benefits get cut. So nightmares are a good sign, but in PTSD, the nightmare gets kind of stuck. It's like on a loop. The record's stuck on a loop, like a broken record. If you can have a dream where you know that you're dreaming, go, I'm not back in Afghanistan, I'm dreaming I'm back in Afghanistan, that can be enough just to lift the needle and allow the record to keep playing. So very good results showing that although it might take 3 or 4 months to teach someone how to lucid dream regularly and with stability, just one lucid dream can be enough to lift the needle in PTSD. So it's very powerful interventions. Let's have a look at some of the uses in Tibetan Buddhism, though, and how this relates to shadow work. So the first stage in Guru Rinpoche's 4 stages of dream yoga is simply recognition. Basically recognize, train yourself to lucid dream. I'd say 80 to 90% of the Western lucid dreaming practices, you can find them all in Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, there's a famous one, the mild practice, which was made very popular by Stephen LeBurge. I'm absolutely sure he did invent that as an original thought, but it's very interesting to note in a 15th century dream yoga manual, you find almost exactly the same technique. I'm sure Stephen LeBurge didn't know about it, I'm sure it was original, but just interesting to note almost all the techniques you find in dream yoga. So when I've asked Lama Yeshe about this, he says, teach whatever techniques help people, whether it's the Western ones or the Buddhist ones. He said they're so similar anyway, but learn to lucid dream. That's the first stage. Learn to be able to go, oh wow, I'm dreaming as I'm dreaming. The second stage, so in Guru Rinpoche's advice, basically the first thing you should do once you get lucid is transformation. But it may not be what you expect. Transformation. It's not transformation of the dreamscape, it's transformation of fear. He says that's the first thing you should do once you get lucid. Transform fear. The texts say things like walk into fire knowing that you cannot be burnt, jump from a high place knowing that you cannot fall, call forth a tiger into the dream. And when the tiger arrives, you have 3 options. Transform the tiger into a Buddha. Third one, ride the tiger like a friendly horse. Now, I'd ask you, what is your tiger? We can update this stuff now. This is like 1,000 years later. What were Tibetans scared of? Like cliffs and tigers, snow leopards. What is your tiger? As soon as we become lucid, transform fear. If that's a fear of spiders, welcome spiders into the lucid dream and transform that fear. If it's fear of flying, manifest an aeroplane in the lucid dream and explore that fear. It doesn't have to be literally a tiger. We can update these Tibetan teachings. But they are absolutely about shadow integration. So when I talk about the stuff like hugging your demons and hugging your fear of kickboxing fights and stuff, that is this second stage. That is transformation of fear in a very everyday way. So again, I believe you get more evidence here that this kind of idea of shadow integration is found in these teachings. The third one, just because let's do all 4. What is the third one? Multiplication. Multiplication. Bit of a funny translation that. This is the one that you'll probably think about transformation. It's the text says things like make big things small, big things small, small things big. Make one thing many, many things one. Make like clones of yourself, so there's like a gazillion of you and then like one of you, and shrink yourself. It's about exploring the pure potentiality of the dream, about exploring the empty nature of the dream. So things like walking through walls, changing heights of things, seeing that there's nothing difficult to do in a lucid dream. Why in a lucid dream can most people do this? Walk through a room. But in a lucid dream, most people find it difficult the first time anyway to walk through a wall. When the wall and the air in the room in the lucid dream are made of exactly the same stuff. Mind, nothingness, pure potentiality, emptiness. And yet, why does the wall seem to be solid? Because we bring in our expectations about reality into the dream with us. We bring in the limits of the ego mind into the limitless space of the lucid dream. But the great thing is, every time we do walk through a wall in a lucid dream, we are deconditioning those limits, which I believe has a deconditioning effect on the mind in the waking state. I think every time you fly through the sky in a lucid dream, every time you hug a demon in a lucid dream, every time you walk through a wall in a lucid dream, you're preparing yourself to fly beyond the limits, in the waking state, to walk through the wall of your own bullshit in the waking state, to embrace the demon of your own self-doubt in the waking state. These can directly transpose. And the fourth one is unification, which many people would think of as the classic dream yoga practices. So, deity self-manifestation, so transforming yourself into Guru Rinpoche or Chenrezig or whatever the Yidam practices you do, as a way to enter into that full self-identification with the deity. And yet, when we get to this stage, unification with what? With our Buddha nature, we're way beyond shadow here. It seems like the beginning of some of these practices tick all the boxes of Western shadow integration. But when you get to the fruition of all these practices, you're way beyond shadow integration, because you're way beyond self. And how can there be a shadow cast if there is no self to cast the shadow? Death practice. So just today, actually, I'd like to read you a quote from Ian Baker. About this idea of the shadow within Tantric Buddhism. It says, from the point of view of Tantra, everything that can be embraced should be embraced. Otherwise, we live only partial lives. The whole idea of Tantric Buddhism is about a radical and compassionate acceptance of all phenomena. As the great 11th century female master Machig Lubdren once said, in order to realize the essence of consciousness, you must approach what you find repulsive and go to the places that scare you in order to find the Buddha within. Tantric Buddhism is not about rejecting experience, but about moving into it more deeply and using the things that we might classify as frightening or dangerous as opportunities to enlarge our relationship to reality as a whole. So just today, at the Kagyu Samazon Buddhist Center, I was facilitating one of the tables at a death cafe. Has anyone heard of the death cafe movement? A couple of people? It's so good. In a nutshell, John Underwood realized the only way to get British people to talk about death was to give them free tea and cake. That's it. Once you gave them free tea and cake, they'd talk about anything, right? So that's the setup, about an hour to an hour and a half. There's always tea and cake. It's about breaking bread. And it's very interesting how pouring a cup of tea for someone when they've just shared their first experience of death suddenly becomes like an offering to a Buddha. It's very interesting. I really realized today this could not be done without the tea and cake. It's vital. But you might think, why were we doing that at Tibetan Buddhist Center? The same reason that we have our Death and Dying Day, our annual day of workshops, talks, art exhibitions, exploring death and dying. Because, of course, Tibetan Buddhism is a wonderfully morbid tradition. And I use morbid in an incredibly positive way. Why has it got negative? Why has it got pejorative connotations anyway? But every day, if we consider our own death, consider our own mortality, this isn't designed to depress us, but to remove the oppression of death anxiety and make us live more awakened lives. This is why the Dalai Lama, one of his main practices that he does every day, I heard one report said he did it 5 times a day, is the death meditation, where you go through imagining the dissolution of the elements, I guess because he's old and is I guess he's approaching death, that's why it's his main meditation. But, 4 or 5 times a day he's supposed to do that. Which got me thinking on the train on the way here. Let's say that meditation is like an hour long or something. He's doing that 5 times a day. There's a pretty good chance he will die while he's doing that death meditation, which would be the most amazing way to die, right? As you're doing the dissolution itself. So, of course, within Tibetan Buddhism, you find all of these practices around death and dying. The late Equine Rinpoche and his Taorokpa therapy, that he designed especially for Westerners, but based on Tibetan principles. One of the big things in that was the life review. They don't actually call it the life review, they call it something else, back to beginnings. But it's essentially, it's just like the Mexican Toltec life recapitulation. You might have read about in the work of Castaneda and stuff like that, where you recapitulate every major memory you've ever had. Because every experience and every memory of the experience holds an energetic charge. And a bit like cookies in your laptop, they build up and build up and build up and kind of slow down your processing speed. So if you can recapitulate every memory, you release that energy, and also can help to release the kind of the karmic links to that too. So you find death practices, you know, in so many aspects of Tibetan Buddhism. And from a Jungian point of view, he referred to death as the ultimate shadow. Death was that thing that we repress, suppress, hide from ourselves and others, that almost all of humanity share that same shadow. And in the modern research into death anxiety, check my time. Perfect. The modern research into death anxiety has shown that people with high levels of death anxiety, so people who have not dealt with their fear of death and dying, are more racist, more tribalistic, more homophobic, more nationalistic than those who have intentionally undergone death anxiety kind of workshops and basically kind of integrated their fear of death. And the reason for this is, if we have a lot of unintegrated fear of death, we are more likely to hang out with people who look like us, because we go, oh, I'm scared of dying, I'll stick with the tribe. So people who look like they are not part of a tribe become more threatening. They found that people who do integrate their fear of death by doing by like writing living wills, going on death integration workshops, doing death cafes, when they then check their kind of psychological stats, they find them to be less racist, less homophobic, less tribalistic, less nationalistic. So death anxiety, the integration of death anxiety is literally good for you. They did some brilliant study just a couple of years ago with basketball players, where they got them to shoot baskets like that, and they're basically standing there just shooting as many baskets as they can. Then they gave them subtle, unconscious cues of death and watched what happened. One of them was simply, they got all of the scientists part of the study to wear t-shirts with skulls on them. They didn't mention the t-shirts with skulls, they just all turned up in skull t-shirts. When they entered the room in the skull t-shirts, the basketball players started scoring more baskets. They had a 30% increase in basketball ability with subtle unconscious cues of death. Then they made the very obvious. They got someone to walk underneath the basket they were shooting and holding a sign saying, "You are going to die." Again, big increase. They all started landing the shots. Because if we can be conscious of the fact that we haven't got a long time to live, we actually become better at stuff. We start operating more clearly. You know, that could be the last basket I'm going to shoot, so I'm going to score it there. It's amazing, the research you look into this. So it's very good for us to integrate the shadow of death. And absolutely you find this within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition as well. And then finally, of course, I'm sure this is something that most people thought I'd be talking about today, so I put it right at the end, is the feeding your demons practice, which a lot of you will be aware of. Lama Sultramal Leone, who has created to say it's a version of Chö is apparently very incorrect. Now, I don't practice Chö, and because a lot of the teachings are secret, I don't know what they are, but from friends who do practice Chö have said, no, feeding your demons is not like a Western version of Chö. She has taken the essence of Chö and created a very powerful Western shadow integration exercise based on it, but it's absolutely not Chö. But for those of you who may know this practice, feeding your demons, this is a practice where you, demon in this context, and in fact all Tibetan Buddhist contexts, demon is referred to, and this is such a great definition, demon is referred to as anything that prevents your experience of freedom. Machig Lubdren, the 11th century master, was asked about this by her son. There's a teaching where her son says, "Mother, when you talk of demons, what do you speak of?" And she says, "Oh, my son, when I talk of demons, I do not speak of small black monsters that petrify all who look upon them. When I talk of demons, I refer to anything that prevents your experience of freedom." So a demon can be the demon of an addiction, the demon of self-doubt, the demon of loneliness, the demon of lack of confidence. If it prevents your experience of freedom, it can be referred to as a demon. And in the feeding your demons practice, you're asked to pick a demon that you're going to work with today. So let's say the demon of loneliness. And you would personify the demon in a visualized form, sitting on a chair in front of you. And there are sorts of questions: what does it look like, what gender is it, all this kind of stuff. It's kind of like chair practice in you might have come across in depth psychology. I believe they do chair practice and Gestalt. So you visualize the demon on the chair, then you ask it certain questions. what do you need from me, what do you want from me, how do you feel when you get what you need from me. And then crucially, before you answer the questions, you imagine entering into the body of the demon. You literally stand in the demon's shoes and you answer the questions as the demon, looking back at you. You imagine that you're sitting on the chair. And then you enter back into your space, and then you dissolve your body into nectar and imagine feeding the demon with the nectar of you. And you imagine the demon's got a big spoon, or it's slurping you up, and the demon's literally eating you. You're offering yourself. And then when the demon's satisfied, it transforms into an ally. So it's almost like it transforms from an element of the dark shadow into an element of the golden shadow. And this ally gives you certain pledges. It says, I'll help you by doing this and doing that, and you can contact me by doing this and doing that. And it's a way of transforming these demons that prevent our experience of freedom into allies, aspects of our mind that can be helpful and useful. And this is the most obvious example of a crossover between full-on Jungian shadow integration practice and a ancient, millennia-old Tibetan Buddhist practice. Now, I know that feeding your demons isn't Chi, but it has enough elements of Chi to be a good example of how this crossover can exist. And there are more practices we can do, but I want to kind of round up what I'm talking about here now. So again, to go back to the beginning, when I said this could be a very short talk because the concept of the shadow does not exist within Tibetan Buddhism, I hope I've given some examples of how the attitude, the approach of shadow integration, of moving towards the repressed and suppressed elements of ourselves and transforming them onto the path of awakening, is absolutely found in certain aspects of Tibetan Buddhism. And perhaps in other forms of Buddhism, perhaps in the earlier forms, the Theravada, it's not so much applied, where desire is to be avoided. But as we know in the tantric practices, desire is not to be avoided. It is to be absolutely transformed, is that it is this powerful energy that can be transformed on the path to awakening. So I think you do have approaches of shadow work within Tibetan Buddhism, but at an ultimate level, the whole idea of the shadow is negated by a path that moves beyond the self. For the shadow is dependent on a self that casts the shadow. If you think about literally what a shadow is created by something blocking the light. So the path of shadow integration, whether it's in Tibetan Buddhism or in Western psychology, is not actually about the shadow. The shadow is an epiphenomena caused by something blocking the light. So in fact, in both paths, our job is to look at the shadow, but then crucially not get stuck on it, but to turn towards the source of the light and see what is blocking the light that is creating that shadow. And that shadow work is not about the shadow. It's about removing the block that is creating the shadow and moving into the light that is beyond the shadow. And that light beyond the shadow, absolutely, we find in this tradition. So, that is my statement of finality. I'm ready for questions that I probably can't answer. And I'm very ready to say, I don't know, ask somebody else. That's really difficult. Give me some time on that. But if you ask any easier ones, then I might be able to help. If you're interested in the subject, then I wrote a book on it, Dreaming Through Darkness, which has got, it's got a chapter on this, basically got a chapter on this, on kind of the shadow work within Tibetan Buddhism. Got a good chapter on death, and it's got a lot of some lucid dreaming chapters too. But this isn't a lucid dreaming book. This is the first one I wrote where it's 80% shadow integration practices, 20% lucid dreaming. And it's practical. You know, a lot of the books I read about shadow integration, there were these brilliant kind of Jungian tomes on the theory of the shadow of the world and the collective shadow and all this kind of stuff, but there weren't many practices. I was like, but how do we actually do this stuff? So when I wrote the book, I wanted it to be the book with the most shadow integration practices out there, and it has. It's got 32 practices in there, and a little bit of theory too. But if you want theory and wisdom, don't come to me. If you want practice and doing this, then I think some of those practices can be helpful. And again, as I said, I'm running a workshop based on the book tomorrow, but come here. But if you know anyone who's not coming here and who's interested, then maybe they'd like to come to that instead. Okay, any questions?
Contribution more than a question, perhaps.
Great, because your question will be too difficult for me, so give me a contribution.
Firstly, there's a quote of Goethe that's quite interesting. Difficult thing sensationalism about, oh, this terrible person did this, and, this
Yeah.
and the mind enters quickly into judgment.
Yeah.
Not terribly useful, but there is no crime so terrible I cannot imagine myself having committed it. It brings up compassion and understanding for the person that has done this thing, because we're all subject to causes and conditions. So there's the second quote is from the Dalai Lama, and it was very practical for me. I saw a documentary about him when I was going through a divorce from my first wife, and I was having a difficult time because if anybody's been through a divorce, or I'm sure everybody's been through relationships, but we have somebody that we loved who knows everything about us, and we know everything about them, and suddenly you're in conflict. So I was watching the television, and the Dalai Lama was speaking, and the camera zooms in on his face as the questioner says to him, "Your Holiness, the Chinese have taken your country, they're persecuting your people and trying to destroy your religion. What do you think about the Chinese?" And he said, "Our friends will tell us what they think we want to hear about ourselves, but our enemies will show us how we really are."
Oh,
I think you'd like that one.
beautiful.
So I applied that in my life in terms of this thing of the shadow of trying to see where I'm projecting onto other people, which is what we're doing. Life is, I don't know, in real estate they say that there are three things that determine the value of real estate: location, location, location. So I think projection, projection, projection are the three things for practitioners, really, because when you're sitting in a Shinei type practice, you're observing your thought, and that's your project. It doesn't have any substance. It's not real. So we're looking at that. That's a projection.
Exactly.
So at the Tantra practice, we're visualizing, imagining palaces of deities, etc. So we're playing with the projection, if you like, rather than. So I don't know whether you need to integrate, because you're talking about the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and a tradition is a kind of container that carries thought forward, and Jung is another tradition in a sense. So when one tries to put two traditions together, some people, the hair goes back on the back of their head, but as personally, I wasn't born a Tibetan, or I wasn't raised in Tibetan Buddhism. I've done quite a lot towards supporting Tibetan teachers. My first teacher was Trungpa Rinpoche, and the second most important teacher, and really my Sawe Lama, was Nobu Rinpoche. So I had two very, very powerful presences in my life. In the first case, I had no projection. I was too young with Trungpa Rinpoche. I had no projection, but I was inside a community of people who were projecting like mad because they were all older than me. I didn't know I was supposed to do that, but he seemed to like that, the fact that I was fresh and new. With Nobu Rinpoche, however, I did develop a big projection. So then, okay, we can come to a question as emerged. Okay, something to... I had a very long and very close relationship with Nobu Rinpoche. As people here who know me, I was his translator. I sat next to him for 8 hours a day, sometimes, translating from Italian into English. And I had a massive projection. So, okay, you touched on this subject. Of course, I was projecting my own Buddha nature onto him, as you said. First, I was totally within the projection, okay, but then I was also dealing with a real human being, and as you say, warts and all, if you like it, and his idiosyncrasies, he's wonderful. He's passed away. All his students are thinking a great deal about him in general, his whole teaching. And he's the founder of this center. This is part of his legacy. We're all thinking about his legacy. Each of us has our very personal memories of him. We're all thinking about that. My personal memories are enormous, but there was a point at which the projection became a problem, and to me, and there was I think I describe it as withdrawing the projection. Now that's what I wanted to ask you about, if you have any experience of talking to me. So with me, it was painful, deeply painful to withdraw. He was like a second father to me, has a very real presence in my life. I produced a book with him that took 4 years working intimately with him all the time. He married me to my wife in a ceremony, he carried my children, and so on. There's so many stories. But at the same time, in the early days at Marigold, we used to, with the first center, we used to all sleep on the first floor. The students were all in sleeping bags like caterpillars. He had the only bed. I had a dream that I fell out of bed with no berubshe. And you know what that means. And I was struggling with that. So this is a withdrawal of the projection, that I was coming to deal with the real person, not my projection. It was very painful. So I guess my question, if it's useful, if it's not, then leave it alone. I've had more than my share of time. What do you think about how can one ease or live with the withdrawal of projection for such an important person like that? We also project onto our wives. You're in love, but then you deal with the real person after the marriage and you withdraw the projection. And then suddenly it all becomes... So what about with the withdrawing of projection? Since shadow is a projection, whether it's positive or negative, how can we ease that transition? Is that an interesting question?
Brilliant. I'm so glad you mentioned the term wife, because when you're asking about within the relationship with the guru, I'm going to say what I'm going to say now, is because I'm still so stuck in that projection stage with my own relationship with my guru. I don't know how to do it or what it would feel like, because I'm totally there in that bit where I know I'm projecting, but at the moment it seems to be it seems to be working. I know I'm projecting. I know I see him peel an apple and I'm like, oh my God, did you see how he peeled the apple? I know it's bullshit. I know I'm projecting. But at the moment it seems to be very helpful. So I don't know. However, as far as projections in relationship, for someone approaching the 10th year of their relationship with the woman who's now their wife, wow. That I remember feeling very clearly, the withdrawal of our projections of each other. Of this idealized version that I had of Jade and our relationship together, and also the idealized projection I had of me as a husband, that I will be this. And when that shattered and crumbled, it was shocking and scary, and a feeling of, oh my God, is this the end of our relationship? But then the thing I saw beneath the projection was way bigger and way more stable and way more real than any of the projections I had around Jade. And honestly, I probably don't like Jade as much now as I used to, but I love her more than I used to. Because what I was liking, what I found pleasant, was this idealized wife, idealized woman that I had chosen to marry. That's shattered now. So I probably don't like her as much, but I love her more. You know, it was into a deeper level, so I don't know, maybe that will happen with the teacher relationship. Teacher? I don't know.
To your teacher? If you shift that from your from one relationship to the other, if you were to carry it over into the other relationship, it's extremely difficult to navigate that.
I mean,
I actually had a breakdown eventually about this, but if you want, I really had a severe breakdown. I couldn't cope with the thing. It was the most powerful experience of my life, actually. Most beneficial experience of my life. So I don't know if it's meant to happen or not meant to happen. I can only say that the complete collapse of my ability to present myself to my teacher as a workable student or a workable human being. I wanted to be a good father to my children, a good husband to my wife. I wanted to be a good student to my teacher, a good son to my mother, a good... all this, and suddenly I was in the shit after years of studying, being a sort of horrible senior student of Namkhai Norbu. I'm suddenly the most fucked up of the lot. But that was the portal to really stopping some of the things I was doing to myself. So I just want to say that Rinpoche was the most incredibly supportive person during this. It wasn't, and one of the things, his wife invited me to come to swim with him. I was in Italy. I think this is worth just saying. Now I'm finished. I thought I was going to go with a whole bunch of students and swim, but I turned up at this place I'd never been before, and I was completely, as a person, I was destroyed at this time. I was not in I was in a terrible place. I was really on the verge of being psychotic. I was really ill. And I came to this place in the middle of the countryside, and there were no cars, so I thought, where are all the people that are normally here with Rinpoche? And the door opened of this house, and Rinpoche came out, Norbu Rinpoche came out, apparently naked. But he was actually wearing a tiny bikini, swimming costume. But those who know him in his later life, and I've known him really well for 30 years by this time, he had a big belly, right? So you couldn't see his bikini. Also, he had false teeth. All his teeth, he had no false teeth in. Also, his hair, which normally was tied up in, completely untied. And he came out and just stood there looking at me. And I was just destroyed as a person. And he just got in the swimming pool and beckoned me, and we swam round and round the pool. And then he got out of the pool with all the water on him and picked up his towel that was there on a chair and walked off without saying a word.
Wow.
What was that all about? Yeah. I'd already had all the discussions you could have about being fucked up with even using that word, which I completely fucked up, I don't know, etc. So my teacher showed himself to me naked.
Literally,
He was actually wearing a tiny little swimming costume. But the lack of defense, he knew what I was going through, I think.
That's lovely.
He knew that I was trying to get away from this idealization of him and become real with him. But I'm sorry if that was too personal, but it
was a lovely story.
It was absolutely, the whole thing, breakdown, we use that term, but it became a breakthrough.
Yes.
But how he could be the midwife of that breakthrough, if you like, by not judging, he never judged me. That's the thing. So the thing about this shadow business, what do you think if you say that a lot of it is self-judgment, and when you stop that and move into acceptance about it all, whether it's your good side, so would you say that's definitely the key, that the deepest
if we could move into
acceptance,
yes, there would be no shadow.
Side, would that fit with your kind of feeling? It was your working.
It would fit with my feeling, and it would actually also fit within the Jungian framework. Jung clearly said the shadow is the only archetype that is self-created. All the other ones come kind of preceded in the psyche. The inner child, the mother, the lover, the devil, whatever it is. If it's in the first 21 of a tarot deck, it's in your mind, these kind of internal archetypes. But the shadow, a child in Jungian thought, the child is not born with a shadow. The child creates a shadow when it is creating its sense of self. And it creates an inventory of love. That which brings it love goes in the creation of the ego pile, or the egoic sense of self, and that which leads to the removal of love, which is tantamount to death for the child, begins the kind of foundations of the shadow. So anyway, because it is self-created, apparently the shadow is the only archetype you can fully integrate. You can be without a shadow. And that is a process of full and complete compassionate acceptance of every aspect of oneself would lead to full integration of the shadow. So yes. And wow, I would love to be there. I don't know, 1,000 million miles away, but it's lovely to know it's possible. And that was such a lovely story about Norbu Rinpoche, just fully nude, with the hair down at wild, with the teeth.
Something out of one of these tankas, some wild divinity. He should be, they dance on corpses he looked like he'd just come out of some, and he could be so integrated in society and give a speech in the town hall dressed in a suit and things. But then suddenly there was this other thing.
It's like he knew that's what you needed to see at that time.
He never said a word. Not him. We talked on other occasions, but he never said a word.
Did you say without his teeth?
This is hello.
Did you say he didn't have his teeth in?
He didn't have his teeth in.
I like that too. That image. He was toothless. Actually, he was safe. Presenting as raffle, but without the teeth.
Shocking, it was just incredibly shocking. The whole thing was shocking.
That's
the fact that he was there by himself, not with a whole lot of other people, was already a surprise, because I was expecting a lot of people. And then the whole thing was just so weird. Now, so if you say, well, dream of it, this was like the memory of it is like a dream. But this is a person, a very deliberate person, if you like. He did that deliberately. So obviously, I think he had that was a teaching of some sort, very good. And here I am. You know, you've got your projection. You're struggling with all your projections collapsing, and it's, you know, you think your world. My world was collapsing, and it really, or I can. So my constructed world, which is what we're all suffering from, a constructed idea of ourselves, constructed idea of my wife. Those constructions collapse. But it's the worst thing in the world. We don't want, we spend a huge amount of effort defending all of that.
Yes.
We don't want it to collapse. And when it collapses, so if you say the church, well, you invite all this stuff, but if it really comes, so it came to me, but you're not, you think, oh, practice, please come, well, when it actually comes, it's the most terrifying thing. But you can go through it and come out like, wow, that's, all that stuff I was doing to myself stopped. Anyway,
Sorry, guys, I don't let that go on a bit long, but I was actually genuinely fascinated by that and didn't want to end the teaching that was within that question. Rinpoche Rinpoche was teaching at the Samazon Centre this week, and he, rather than saying any questions, he says, any questions, stories, insights, or jokes? And I thought, I'm going to do that from now on, because I think that's much more open to any questions. So, any questions, insights, stories, or jokes? I think we've got maybe 5 minutes left or something. Yes?
It's leading on from John's lovely story. What you make me think of advice from my mum. My parents worked in medicine, and we lived on the top of the shop. And so I grew up in a community that was deeply troubled, and I remember my mum was just giving me advice about dealing with people generally, and she said, I know the rap sheet of all my patients. I know, that there are murderers, rapists, drug dealers, armed robbers. She said, but when they walk through the door, they're my patients, and I just deal with the person who's in front of me and what they need. And she was and my dad was saying they were very well regarded and loved, and they just relaxed. Now it's something I've taken into my work. I work as a journalist, so I Duffy's Generals, and I remember meeting one guy who I went on to actually be friends with, but it was one of these sort of strange meetings with. Somebody, like a contact I had in Benghazi said, you need to meet this guy, he's called Dr. A. And I knew he'd been imprisoned in Misrata. I really didn't, even today I don't really know, who Dr. A really is. And so I went to the agreed meeting point. It was about nearly midnight. I was checking with my editor, doing security check-ins. I had no idea. And the person that I met, who had sounded very confident on the phone, I knew that he had been tortured. And I've met people who've been tortured but have physically recovered. But this was the first time I'd seen somebody who had been, physically battered and broken, and having to it would be easy to be frightened and revulsed. His hands were shattered, and his hands were still in sort of splints. His face was still punched in, bruising everywhere. He walked very slowly with a limp, and slowly came towards me and sat. And then what was initially a tense moment, and I was just thinking, you just have to be with that person, and you can't project your wincing or your revulsion, and that's led on to a lot more work. And going back to Tong Len, I've actually started doing this when I'm interviewing people who are telling me very, very distressed stories. They're in immense distress, and it makes such a massive difference while I'm listening to them to do Tong Len. It's a hugely powerful practice, and also I found that when somebody tells you a distressing story, you as the listener can be secondary victimisation, and I've actually found that Tong Len immunises me from secondary victimisation.
That has not surprised me, but I've never heard that before. That's really interesting. And just to go back, you said a lot there. It's so lovely that this habit, you saw your mum, and I think you said your dad too, do.
They were both in general practice.
Able to remove their shadow projections to see the person, the patient there. They say in some of the kind of building blocks of how the shadow works, it's shame, fear and judgment are the three kind of catalysts of the shadow. Every time we judge both ourselves and others, every time we respond with fear or shame in both ourselves and others, and to be able to not project fear of what a person looks like, the shame of how we might feel about the projection or what they bring up in us, and also that judgment. Yeah, that's a real classic way of removing shadow projection. And the Tonglen thing's beautiful.
It's fantastic.
And isn't Tonglen so good, because you don't need to do the whole, sometimes when we're kind of doing the visualization, you can do it on the tube. Someone's crying on the tube and maybe you feel it's not the best time to ask them if they're okay, and just to sit there looking, just every breath, I'm sure it does something. And if it doesn't do anything for them, it does something to the part of ourselves that's been triggered by their upset maybe. Yeah.
I think, this is just from experience, but that if you're around people who are in distress, your greatest responsibility to them is to be calm and quiet, and just to be with them. And it's really not easy at all. Particularly with Dr. A, his physical appearance was, deeply triggering response. You just think, bloody hell, see the physical impact of what real torture does. But another parallel is also, riding horses. If you want a horse to go well, you have to relax. They're the biggest teacher. Because if you really tense up, they'll just chuck you off.
Interesting you said that. There's a lot of equine therapy is one of the best treatments for veterans. And often used, again, the term isn't used, but real shadow integration stuff. And some interesting science on the way that horses can pick up on the vibration of your heartbeat much more sensitively than any human can. So something as little as stilling your heartbeat, and the horse will it's kind of repelled. The horse will follow if you still your heartbeat and stuff like that. I think we could learn a lot about our shadows through equine therapy. Yeah, thank you. I bet you're a very good journalist. I haven't read any of this stuff, but with that approach, I bet you get very good stories.
Hi. You said that a lot of the approaches and the attitude of shadow integration are in Tibetan Buddhism. But I wonder if you think that, as Westerners, we need some extra skillful means, like, in your book and other approaches, Jungian therapy, that kind of thing, as Buddhists in the West, or, whether we can just follow the tradition, the path without maybe some extra psychological help and that kind of stuff.
Great question. I personally think, this is just my personal opinion, that absolutely following it as it was taught in Tibet back in the day as Westerners is not a good idea, and is not skillful, and is simply not the best approach. I think for myself, I found that if I can be doing my daytime meditation practice, which may be full-on Tibetan, all the Nundro stuff, but alongside Western talking therapy, that for me is the best approach to problems in my life. Not regular therapy, but if there's something that comes up on meditation just too big, and I think this is too big, and the person I'd usually talk about it to, simply does not have this experience, especially stuff around sex and relationships. If we're talking to certain people who have not been in sexual relationships, part of me thinks, however enlightened they are, there's going to be an experience that is missing here, that is going to affect the advice they can offer. So I'm a big fan of actually keeping the teas separate, not mixing our teas, but for a practitioner of any Buddhist path also, if it benefits them, using Western talk therapy, using Western shadow integration exercises, absolutely. But who knows? That's just, maybe someone else has found that's a terrible idea, but I found it to be very helpful. And I know people like Rob Priest, in his book Psychology of Buddhist Tantra, and the work that Rob Priest does with one-on-one Skype sessions with usually young men, but I'm sure women too, who are going through spiritual emergency, is brilliant work. And I think he's a big proponent of that too, of being able to have both the paths separate and complete, but them being complementary. Yeah.
What does it mean, spiritual emergency?
Spiritual emergency, it seems to be kind of like a Western term that was coined for kind of like spiritual freak out, you know, when someone's having maybe also, again, a slightly misused term, Kundalini awakening, out of context.
What do you mean, like the long,
I think it's
go to the long dark
Gross
nights?
term.
Oh, is it?
I think he had a spiritual emergency network for people. Instead of, I talked about, well, is a breakdown or is it a breakthrough?
Breakdown, breakthrough, yeah.
When people say, oh, you're having a breakdown, it's very negative.
Yeah.
If you say, oh, he's in a spiritual emergency, it's meant to be less blamey, less negative, and say, well, yeah, this is an evolution, but you know, the caterpillar becomes a butterfly by shedding your skin.
Yeah.
Shedding your skin, it's an emergency for you because the precipitation of a collapse of a set of conceptual frameworks can be appear very threatening.
Yeah.
It's actually the thing that you've been praying.
Yeah, this is what we want to happen.
Conceptual
And
framework.
then the cells start to break and we go,
The
no!
naked face of reality. But when it comes, when we have these moments where it's terrifying.
Isn't it such a funny irony? We're literally praying for this, and then it happens and we're like, fuck, stop, stop, stop.
No, I understand the idea. It is just that I didn't hear the concept. I mean, in terms of the naming. That
Oh right, no, it was a great question. It led to a wonderful insight. I didn't actually know it was a Stanislav Grof term either.
Yeah,
I think it's
spiritual emergency.
Yeah. Anything else?
Not only spiritual, yeah.
Human emergency.
I've got one question.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Have you taught this in China or Asia? This yoga?
The dream yoga stuff?
Whatever you teach.
No.
Really? Not to Asian?
I'm just trying to think how far Asia is. No, definitely not in Asia.
Yeah.
I've done the shadow stuff in Kuwait. That is the closest I've got to that part of the world.
How was it in Kuwait?
Kuwait was, we did this exercise, we did the mask exercise.
Yeah.
So the one I told you about with all the shame on the inside and stuff, in a group that had women in niqab, is the full one?
Niqab is the full.
Yeah, women in full niqab, as well as very funky young Kuwaiti artists running coffee shops and stuff, doing the mask exercise, doing eye gazing together. It was part of this kind of festival they were having. So, you know, admittedly, my only experience of Kuwaiti life, the 24 hours I was there, were probably the most open-minded, arty kind of people. But it was a very interesting place to look at this, and to look at the shadow of society within, the shadow within Kuwaiti society.
Well, there are lots of shadows in the Middle East.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because, I mean, I live in Tunisia, and people are beginning... There is actually...
In where?
In Tunisia, in North Africa.
Oh, right, yeah.
I mean, I was, apart from like Korean and Chinese people who are, and some Japanese people who are based there, you know, there's not really any Buddhism at all. There's a Vipassana group, we're very, very secular. But people are beginning to open up to just regular yoga, and the Indian Embassy does, you know, proper yoga, meditation. So it's interesting that you did a workshop in the Middle East, because that's quite...
You also asked about the Death Cafe.
Yeah.
We're doing them every 3 months now at the Kagyu Semazon Buddhist Center. But you could start your own Death Cafe. It's all open source. You can download the PDF online. It gives you exactly how to run it. They should always be donation basis or for free, blah, 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 all the instructions. They're brilliant. They're wonderful. You need, I think, 4 people minimum, so yourself, so it should be a group of 5, including the facilitator minimum. And there's the Death and Dying Day, which is on the 23rd of November this year, again at Kaguya-sama-zon in Bermondsey. That'll be a whole day of talks and workshops around that big shadow of death and dying. Okay, I think we've gone over too long now, guys. We'd better finish. But thank you so much. Oh, I've got some books at the back there. There's an honesty box thing, so if you want one, you just put in your money and take your change and stuff. Oh, thank you. Yes. I feel like it's like big shots.
Yes, I think